years ago down in LA, I stumbled upon a driveway in the suburbs overflowing with SW20s. And that collection, of course, belonged to our friend Bob, who spends his time collecting and restoring, or as some of you called it, hoarding, these 90s gems. As you can see, surrounded by angry neighbors trying to reclaim the peaceful uniformity they once shared. To this day, it's the most insane one-make private collection I've had the chance to see in person.
It was a lot of fun. He's clearly very passionate about those cars, and there's a few people I feel like across the country, across the continent here in North America, who are doing similar things and kind of resurrecting these cars. And behind me is one of the most insane AMG collections that I've ever seen. So we're gonna go for a tour today. I'm gonna go drive a C36 AMG. This is gonna be a bit of an adventure. So let's take a look. All right, Brooks, you're a crazy person with a bad habit.
Steve Lacy, bad habit. Yeah.
So we already know the C55 was like the first to get swapped.
Yeah.
You just want to take us around?
Yeah, we could do like the family tour. Yeah, so my name is Brooks. I have a YouTube channel also called ANDERZÉN, where it's all really focused on just kind of the journey with all of these things, modifications, maintenance, adventures, etc. So that's where a lot of this came from, but I'd be doing it even if I didn't have a channel. So it's just, yeah, something I like sharing. But yeah, it all kind of happened by accident. I was telling Marcus earlier, I bought the C55 and felt guilty that I was learning so much from the forums that I wanted to give back in some way, and recorded a random poor quality video on doing engine mounts on that thing. And then it just snowballed into what is now a collection of cars that I would have never thought I would have. The next one was the ML55 over there in the back, which is still like old, trusty, old, reliable. It's a great rig. My wife never wants to get rid of it. I agree with her. It's just so good for us.
Yeah.
Body on frame, truck-like, handling, and it's a cool car. Next was supposed to be one of these, but I actually ended up with the E420 over here. So this car, I hadn't really been looking for one of these. I was always a fan of the 124 body style, but just never kind of looked. And I struck out on a few C36s, didn't really know what direction I wanted to go from there. So I just decided, let's look at the 124 chassis. So E420, 1994 E420. And for those that know, the E420 and the 500, the E500, 500E, 400E, etc. Only two V8 124s, and they're pretty hard to find. 500Es especially, of course, but the 500Es, they're basically just the bigger bored out version of this motor. But they also get a ton of like suspension changes. They're a little bit wider, front and rear, and ton of different things that went into those. That was like, people like to call them the Porsche Mercedes, because they had Mercedes contracted out to Porsche to put them through the assembly line. Porsche wasn't really super involved in any development necessarily, but it was kind of like Mercedes just helping out another neighbor, letting them get some contract work at the time because Porsche needed it.
Similar to RS2, although Porsche did a lot more on the RS2.
Exactly. Yeah, so very similar. So there's something that translates directly. A lot of it is very similar, like engine bay wise. It's just a smaller displacement version of the M119. This one I have the factory airbox off. I just run the straight ram intake just because it's easy to get to everything and it sounds awesome. And
it looks like a meme.
Yeah, it's silly.
It just looks incredibly
It's super silly. So, but it works, and I just like being able to access everything a lot quicker versus pulling off an airbox and doing all that. So the gearbox out of this car is actually from the cars we were talking about earlier, the C230 compressors. There is, the early ones had a round bell housing, and the other ones had kind of like a triangular round bell housing. This one I'm using an adapter kit from the Kangaroos team that basically just an adapter flange and then a clutch and flywheel that they set up. The flywheel is custom, they make it, it's all billet, one piece. single mass, but the clutch is actually out of a diesel Mercedes.
Oh, wow.
So they just use those. They hold fantastic numbers, and yeah, they're no problem. So this era in general, Mercedes very like similar. Like this car and the C36 share a lot of things. A lot of components on them are interchangeable.
They look similar. Yeah,
very similar body styling. It's just like shrunken or larger versions of each one of them. So
how does this one feel to drive?
It's fun.
Yeah?
I think you would like it. Yeah, it's not as powerful as either one of those, but this is like a car you can wind out. And it's fun too, being a smaller V8. Like you just wind it out. It's kind of, I label it as like a momentum car. Versus I do have a 5-liter M119 sitting in a warehouse right now for me. Nice. That I would like to swap into this, but we'll see if it happens before I end up moving it into other hands or not, or what I decide to do. But next one that happened was this.
I love how you say like, oh, they actually just happened to me.
Happened. So this one is MO63, it's 2008. This has a M156 V8 in it, and for a long time I was hesitant to acquire anything M156 V8 because you hear horror stories about them and head bolts and all kinds of lifters and all kinds of things going wrong. But in reality, it's kind of forum folklore to an extent. It wasn't that big of a deal, and especially if you're maintaining them on time, like it's really not that big of an issue. That said, I went and drove one for the first time. I couldn't believe how just phenomenally fast it felt for a big 6,000-pound SUV.
It's huge.
And it kind of blew me away. And from that point forward, I was like, hey, maybe this could be a good replacement for our old 2000 MO55. We ended up still liking that one a little bit more. This one, I like both, but they're very different, like very, very different. So this one, a week after I bought it, I tore it open and decided to get my M156 Owner's Knowledge 101 degree, replace the head bolts because this was an early model that had the old style. They all looked very clean. They probably would have lasted forever, but it was more a peace of mind game, thinking that we're probably going to keep this thing for a very long time. And I did the cam adjuster plates and buckets, and yeah, it's tuned. It's insanely quick. This was the fastest car in the fleet before I got this, which we'll talk about in a second. But
wow. This is surprising, and maybe you could speak to this a little bit. You don't seem to have a particular preference as far as era goes. You're kind of experimenting and dabbling in all of the eras.
I think this era in reality is kind of my threshold as of now. That could change later. Like, I really do. I would love to have a C63 one day, a W204, anywhere up from, all the way up to 2014. I do really like the GLA 45s, which are kind of a front wheel based or front wheel drive based, all-wheel drive little hatch that Mercedes makes, 4-cylinder turbo. I've gotten all these things for so cheap that it's more of a price point game, and it's also, the newer they get, the more computers involved and the more complex they are to try to figure things out if things go wrong or if you want to modify things. After that one,
your dream car.
The dream car. This is the car that I saw as a 15, 16-year-old on Craigslist, and literally the same spec pretty much. And I saw it and was just like, what is that? I didn't know really anything about Mercedes at that time. Obviously I've seen them, wandering around the world, but I didn't know anything about them. I was into Hondas and Skylines and Evos, and I saw this and I just fell in love with the body shape of it, the styling of it. It was like subtle but aggressive and just had this really cool presence to it. And I just remember clicking on that link and just being enamored of all the pictures and looking at everything and just taking it all in, and then going on this research dive of what is a C36, what is an M104 engine, what is all of this stuff. Yeah, all these years later, I'm gonna be 33 this summer, and this kind of fell into place. Met a buddy talking about manual swap stuff actually, and a year later he just happened to send me this car's pictures at an auction site that he was going to, and he didn't even know that I liked him. He just messaged me and was like, hey, this C36 is going in, it's a one owner, let me know if you want me to bid on it for you. And the rest was history. I bought it, I was in San Francisco, I flew down, drove it back up, sight unseen, and my stepdad and I took the 14-hour drive, and luckily it was all good. And it's a fantastic buy now, knowing what I got.
It drives incredible.
Yeah.
Especially for the age. You know what this car made me think of today? You know when people say like, oh, they just don't build them like they used to.
Yeah.
This is the perfect, like as close as I've got to
What
that statement.
you'll feel that in this, and if you drove the E420, it's very similar. Like the build quality, like we talked about, the thunk of the doors, like everything about them just feels very well made.
Yeah.
And that's why it's still standing here in the shape that it is after being driven so much.
Yeah.
So that was that.
Real quick, you've manual swapped C55.
C55 and the E420. This one has plans to. As a matter of fact, we got pedals for a 202 right here, and then we got pedals for a 204 when we can acquire a C63 someday. So
oh my God. Wow, you're ahead of the game.
I have parts collected. I have pretty much everything I need. Not everything is pictured here, but I got drive shafts. I got, clutch setups. I got all types of stuff collected so that when we need it, we'll go grab it. This was the next one, and again, it's kind of a crazy story. I'd seen it on Craigslist pop up, and it actually got sent. I have a group chat that I'm in, like all C55 buddies, and somebody sent it, and it was right around the time I just bought the C36. So I was like, even if this is true, which it looked too good to be true, like I'm not gonna, it's pushing me too thin right now. I'm not gonna buy that and then buy this. So it disappears. I figured that thing sold like in a day or two. It's got to be gone. A couple months go by, and I see it pop up again randomly. This is 4 or 5 weeks ago now. I'm like, this thing, how is this thing still here? So I called the guy up, and it actually ended up being a normal, really nice person. And Alex, shout out to him. He owns his own shop and just didn't want it to go to somebody that didn't know what the heck they were doing. As soon as I started telling him about, I have a channel, I have, these different swaps that I've done, different cars I work on, he was like, I think you're the right guy for it. I'm gonna pull the listing if you wanna come check it out.
Wow.
If you don't want it, it's okay. If you do, let's, figure something out. So since then, I've been literally going through everything on it. This has the supercharged V8 out of a SL55. Yeah, this has got a few modifications done to it. Wistek crank pulley down there, so 180 millimeter crank pulley. It's about 30 millimeters bigger than stock. Still on the regular clutch stock pulley. Couple billet pulleys, etc. I just did the valve covers on it. I have the powder coated surge tanks inside the garage right now. I'm running $50 eBay 550cc injectors, so I'm waiting until I get an injector tester here to verify that they actually flow at the rate they're advertised at. So I haven't put the surge tanks on yet. I did a ton of wiring on this thing. It was an absolute mess before, and I got it all nice and cleaned up. And
the Black Series too, that's like the holy grail of this car.
Yeah.
Do you plan on doing anything body wise?
Sponsorships, let me know. If I could link up with a company that makes a kit for these, it'd be super cool. Maybe it's something I would try and own down the line, but my whole MO with all these cars is like less is more, and mechanically sound is what I try to go for. So making them look decent is important, obviously, but I think the way it sits is pretty good. Like, it's to my liking. So I'll probably change it up a little bit, but overall I'm happy where it's at. It has somebody custom made these. These are all real carbon. Wow, somebody spent like, according to the receipts, something like $3 grand doing all these. It's got all the center console.
Yeah.
Every piece is all real carbon, which
looks a little bit more modern, closer to a C63.
Yeah, it's different, but it's just somebody spent a lot of time on making them for sure.
Now,
and
is this
then
a manual swap candidate or no?
It could be, but I'll have to see it. Who I should mention as well, Mercedes Swap Shop, Josh, big shout out to him. He's my tuner for that car, this car, and some other ones too. But we tuned the trans on this, so we'll see how it responds. These hold so much power, these 722.6 gearboxes, that in this case, for this car, I don't really see it as a necessity. If I keep it, it's going to be around 550, 600 horsepower. The Holy Grail car is a version of this, which is called a P900, which is going to be unobtainable because there's too few of them. Making this into like a version of that would be cool. I really want, which is not technically AMG, but I really want a 190E Cosworth. Those are another Grail car for me. My wife really wants a G55. I would love to have one. C43, oh, 202, the C43.
AMG is like, that's the one. And
Yeah.
I've also heard people swapping.
Yeah, the 55s.
Yeah,
I have a
the
buddy
platform.
nearby, Lewis, that did that swap, and
Wow, okay.
that's a fun car. They're so light, and with that torque in there, it rips.
Muscle car.
Yeah, so
Well, thanks, man. Thanks for having me out. Thanks
Yeah.
for letting me drive your cars.
thank you.
incredible,
It was a cool feeling. It was surreal to be able to like
Yeah.
take two out at once and seeing them rip around. And
All right, you guys. Insane collection. Just a crazy day spent here with Brooks up here in Washington State. I guess down here from where I'm coming from. We only had time today to drive the two cars, honestly, which is more than I could have ever dreamed of. Two very different cars. The C55 being a completely modified, completely transformed car from its original state. And then, of course, the C36, which is one of the all-time great Mercedes-AMG products and the first real Mercedes-AMG car to kind of leave the factory, and a competitor to the E36 M3 kind of in some respects, but not nearly as close as I thought now that I've driven it. I've driven both cars. They are so wildly different in the way they drive, and that kind of speaks to how different M and AMG were, especially in the 90s and early 2000s, whereas now they're kind of similar in the products and the direction they kind of take them. So either way, thanks, Brooks.
yeah, thank you.
Thanks again. You can check Brooks out on Instagram, YouTube. All of his links will be in the description, and let me know what you guys think in the comments below. We'll see you soon.